My slumber was abruptly severed by an insistent tapping, a rhythmic rapping that echoed through the morning stillness. Groggy and disoriented, I struggled to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. At first, my thoughts gravitated towards the window, its glassy surface a potential canvas for nature's symphony. But the tapping lacked the urgency of rain or wind, its cadence too deliberate for a frantic bird. Confused and intrigued, I slowly peeled myself out of bed and approached the mirror. As I drew closer, the sound intensified, a persistent drumming that reverberated through the room. I hesitated, my reflection staring back at me with a haunting familiarity. With a trembling hand, I rapped my knuckles against the cool surface, the sound mirroring the unknown tapping almost perfectly. I moved my hand away, only to have the tapping resume. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the realization dawned upon me. The source of the knocking was not outside, but within. I scanned the room frantically, searching for any logical explanation, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. The only sound that filled the space was the relentless tapping from the mirror. Time seemed to slow down as I stood there, frozen in disbelief. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the impossible. Was I hallucinating? Losing my sanity? As desperation gnawed at me, I mustered the courage to confront the mirror. I placed my ear against its surface, hoping to discern the origins of the tapping. To my horror, the sound seemed to come from within the mirror itself. I recoiled in terror, my heart pounding in my chest. Fear propelled me away from the mirror, out of the bedroom, and into the safety of the hallway. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. As the initial shock wore off, a sense of dread washed over me. I knew I couldn't ignore the tapping forever. I had to find out what was behind it. Slowly and reluctantly, I returned to the bedroom. The tapping had ceased, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. I glanced at the mirror, its surface reflecting my trepidation. With renewed determination, I approached the mirror once more. This time, I did not hesitate. I rapped my knuckles against the glass, and the tapping resumed. A surge of mingled terror and fascination coursed through me. I moved my hand away, and the tapping stopped. It was as if the mirror was responding to my actions, a sentient entity trapped within its depths. Summoning all my courage, I pressed my ear against the mirror. I closed my eyes, concentrating on the sound. It was faint, but undeniable, a soft, muffled whispering. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words. At first, they were nothing more than incoherent murmurs, but gradually, they began to coalesce into something discernible. "Help me," the voice whispered. "Please help me." A wave of pity washed over me. I had never believed in spirits, or the supernatural, but the desperation in that voice was undeniable. Without hesitation, I rapped on the mirror 3 times. "I'll help you," I vowed. The whispering ceased, and the tapping stopped. A profound sense of peace filled the room. I opened my eyes and gazed at my reflection. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of gratitude in its eyes. I left the bedroom, my mind reeling. I had no idea what I had just experienced, but I knew that my life would never be the same. The mirror held a secret, and I was determined to uncover it. The apartment building groaned, a tired sigh of settling concrete. My apartment on the 14th floor swayed slightly, an illusion magnified by the creeping fear in my gut. It was the 3rd night in a row, the 3rd night I'd seen it. The grinning face peering from the darkness beyond my window, its smile a twisted mockery of friendliness, a grotesque mask of malice. It hadn't started like this. It started with a fleeting glimpse, a flash of white teeth in the dark as I was falling asleep. I'd dismissed it as a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination fueled by the city's relentless hum. But then it reappeared, the next night, clearer. Closer. A wide, unnervingly cheerful grin stretched across a face that seemed to be made of shadows. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a reflection from the streetlights, distorted by the glass. Maybe it was a homeless person with a strange mask, trying to scare people. But logic felt flimsy, a fragile barrier against the creeping horror that was seeping into my bones. I couldn't sleep. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, the grinning face returned, its smile stretching wider, encompassing the darkness, consuming my sanity. I'd spend hours staring out the window, waiting for the first hint of dawn, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. I needed to talk to someone. But who? The police? They'd probably think I was crazy. My best friend Alex? He'd just laugh, and I couldn't face that right now. I needed a distraction, an escape from the suffocating reality of my apartment. So, I decided to go out, to walk around the city, maybe find a coffee shop and lose myself in the cacophony of life. Stepping out into the cool night air was a welcome reprieve. The city's energy crackled around me, a symphony of car horns, distant sirens, and the laughter of revelers. I walked, my mind still buzzing with fear, but I tried to focus on the sights and sounds around me. Despite myself, I found a dull pleasure in observing the city at night, a tableau of vibrant contrasts, the neon brilliance of billboards clashing with the shadows cast by towering buildings, the hurried pace of life contrasting with the quiet solitude of park benches. It was a familiar routine, a dance I'd done many times before, each night a comforting repetition of the previous. Yet tonight felt different. A disquiet, a premonition of impending danger, hovered over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched. I stopped at a small cafe, its warm glow inviting amidst the city's cold indifference. I ordered a coffee, hoping the caffeine would banish the shadows that were creeping back into my mind. "You look troubled, kid," said the cafe owner, a wizened old man with a kind face and eyes that seemed to see into your soul. I tried to smile, to brush off his concern. "Just a bad day," I mumbled, feeling foolish for confiding in a stranger. The old man chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Everyone has bad days, kid. But some nights the bad days are a little bit worse than others, right?" I stared at him, surprised by his unexpected insight. I didn't reply, but the unspoken question hung in the air between us. He saw it, the fear in my eyes, the shadow of the grinning face that haunted my dreams. "This city's got a way of making you feel things, kid. Sometimes it's real, and sometimes it's just a trick of the light. But it's real to you, isn't it?" I nodded slowly, surprised by the honesty that tumbled out of me. I see it. A face grinning at me from my window every night." He listened, his kind eyes steady. He didn't scoff, didn't dismiss my experience as a hallucination or a delusion. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he understood, as if he had seen the same thing. "Some things you can't explain, kid. Some things are just different. Like the city itself. It's a living, breathing thing, and sometimes it whispers to you, tells you things you don't want to hear." His words were chilling, yet comforting. It was as if he was acknowledging a truth I hadn't dared to voice, a reality that existed beyond the boundaries of my understanding. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But there are things you can do. Things that can help. Things that might." He hesitated, his gaze flickering towards the street outside, the darkness beyond the cafe's windows. "Make it go away." He then told me a story, a tale whispered on the margins of the city's collective consciousness, a story about a creature, a being that existed in the shadows, a being that fed on fear and despair. It was a story about an entity that could be appeased, but could never be truly banished. The old man's story made the hairs on my arms bristle. But there was a strange comfort in it, a sense of understanding, a way of rationalizing the irrational. "You have to listen to the whispers, kid. The city will tell you what to do." As I left the cafe, the night felt colder, the city's whispers more distinct, more urgent. I could feel the presence of something watching me, something lurking in the shadows, waiting. I walked back to my apartment, each step echoing in the silence of the empty street. I was scared, but the fear now felt different. It had transformed into something else, a twisted mix of apprehension and morbid curiosity. I wanted to know what was waiting for me in the darkness beyond my window, what the city was trying to tell me. Opening my apartment door, I could feel a chill, a cold draft that had nothing to do with the city's night air. I moved to the window, my heart pounding against my ribs. The grinning face stared back at me, the light from the street reflecting in its eyes, giving them a cold, almost predatory gleam. It seemed to be closer this time, almost tangible, an oppressive presence that filled the room. I was paralyzed, frozen by fear. But then something changed. The grin morphed, twisted, becoming a horrifying, grotesque mask of pain. The eyes, once filled with malice, were now filled with a bottomless despair. A voice, a whisper, resonated in my mind, carried on the wind that was swirling around me, cold and sharp as shattered glass. "Help me." The voice, a silent plea for help, was coming from the face, from the figure that had haunted my nights, from the creature of shadows that was bound to this city, to this place. And in that moment I knew what I had to do. I wasn't scared anymore. Just a bit confused. And a little bit curious. I had a feeling this was going to be a very long night. I pulled open the window, the cold night air rushing in. "I'm coming," I whispered, stepping onto the balcony, into the darkness, into the unknown. And the city held its breath, waiting. The flickering light bulb cast a sickly yellow glow across the attic room. Dust motes danced in the air, each one a tiny, shimmering speck against the encroaching darkness. I stood there, legs shaky, heart pounding, a frantic tattoo against my ribs, staring at my sister. Or rather, at the two of her. Two identical figures, both wearing the faded denim overalls and worn sneakers of our childhood, stood side by side on the dusty wooden floor. Two identical faces, framed by the same messy brown hair, stared back at me. One, my sister, Amelia, her features contorted in a mask of terror. The other, a replica of her, a perfect, chilling echo, her face placid, almost serene. "Amelia?" I croaked, my voice a dry rasp. She didn't answer. She didn't even blink. Just stared at me with those wide, terrified eyes, the same fear mirrored in the placid, unblinking eyes of her duplicate. What is this?" I choked out, my throat tightening with each word. I had come to visit Amelia after a phone call from my mother, a frantic, garbled message full of whispered anxieties about Amelia's strange behavior, and the shadow that had been following her around the house. I'd immediately dismissed it as a childish fear, a product of Amelia's vivid imagination. But as I crossed the threshold of the attic room, the place we'd spent countless hours playing as kids, the air suddenly felt thick, heavy with an oppressive silence. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic creak of the old house settling, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Then I saw them. It was like staring into a warped mirror, a reflection turned sinister. Amelia, my sister, who had always been a vibrant, bubbly presence, now stood frozen, fear radiating from her like heat. And beside her, the other Amelia, the echo, a chilling, silent duplicate, her expression unreadable. A cold wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't a childish scare, not a trick of the light. This was real, tangible, and terrifyingly, eerily familiar, like a forgotten memory suddenly springing to the surface. A memory I had tried to bury, a memory of a dark, twisted story my grandmother had whispered to me as a child. The double, she'd called it, her voice a husky rasp. The dark twin, a shadow that steals your light, your life. A reflection, but not a reflection. Your doom. The shadow that walks with you, unseen, until it claims you whole. I'd always dismissed it as a bedtime story, a grotesque nightmare spun from the fabric of my grandmother's fading mind. But now, staring at the two Amelias, the reality of that story slammed into me like a physical blow. "Amelia?" I tried again, my voice barely a whisper. The Amelia in front of me, my sister, flinched, her eyes wide with an unreadable mixture of fear and horror. The other, the echo, didn't move, her expression unchanged, a mask of chilling, unnatural calm. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched whine pierced the silence. It came from the other Amelia, the one who didn't move, the one with the unsettling serenity. The whine grew, becoming a shrill, jarring hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. My eyes darted around the room, frantically searching for the source. Then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible pulsating light emanating from the shadow cast by the single light bulb. The shadow was elongated, reaching out towards the wall, a distorted, monstrous silhouette that stretched and writhed. And within that shadow, the light pulsed, like a heartbeat, growing in intensity with each passing second. It felt as though some unseen entity was trying to break free, to claw its way into our reality, fueled by the shrill hum that reverberated through the room. Fear clawed at me, tightening its icy fingers around my heart. I had to do something, anything. "Amelia!" I cried out, desperation lacing my voice. "It's me! Your brother! Can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered, a spark of recognition flickering briefly in the depths of her terror. She took a hesitant step forward, then stopped abruptly, her gaze fixed on the monstrous shadow on the wall. Don't come closer," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming. The shadow throbbed in response, the light pulsing faster, the hum intensifying, growing into a maddening, piercing shriek. I watched as the light from the bulb began to flicker, each flicker accompanied by a surge of the throbbing shadow. The room was growing colder, the air thick with an oppressive tension, a sense of impending doom. I felt a hand grasp my arm, a cold, clammy touch. It was Amelia, her eyes wide with fear, her voice a desperate plea. Don't let it get me." I knew I couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear. I had to break this. I had to save her. But how? My eyes fell on the light bulb, its light struggling against the encroaching darkness. Then I saw it, the old, metal lampshade hanging from the ceiling, the one we used to play with as kids, pretending to be pirates on a moonlit ocean. An idea sparked in my mind, a desperate hope flickering in the darkness. "Amelia!" I called out, my voice tinged with urgency. "Do you remember the pirate game?" My sister, her eyes brimming with fear, looked at me, her confusion evident. "The pirate game?" she echoed, her voice a mere whisper. I nodded, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "The pirate game," I repeated. "Remember the light bulb? We used to pretend it was the moon, guiding us across the ocean." Her fear momentarily receded, replaced by a flicker of recognition. "Remember the lampshade?" I continued, my voice a mix of desperation and hope. "We used to call it our pirate ship." Her eyes widened, the fear lessening, replaced by a spark of understanding. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all I had. "Amelia," I said, my voice firm, "get the lampshade. You have to hold it over the light bulb." Her gaze moved to the lampshade, a hesitant movement, like a moth drawn to a flame. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped the cold metal. "Amelia!" I urged, my voice a mixture of pleading and command. "Don't let it get to the light." She looked back at me, eyes wide, but the fear was fading, replaced by a glimmer of defiance. She slowly lifted the lampshade, her movements stiff and unnatural, but her gaze, the look in her eyes, had changed. It no longer held the terror of a victim, but the defiant fire of a fighter. She held the lampshade, its metal cold against her trembling hand, and slowly, carefully, began to lower it over the bulb. The humming intensified, the shadow writhing on the wall, pulsating with a terrifying intensity. The light bulb flickered violently, a desperate struggle against the encroaching darkness. Amelia held her ground, her face pale, but her grip on the lampshade firm. She seemed to be fighting an invisible force, a battle fought with the strength of her will, her courage a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. Then, with a final, violent, shuddering flicker, the light bulb went out. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the moonbeams filtering through the dusty attic window. My sister stood there, the metal lampshade in her hand, her face illuminated by the faint silver glow. The hum, the pulsating light, the monstrous shadow, were all gone. The room was silent, a heavy silence that hung in the air like a shroud. But there was something else, something different. Amelia, my sister, was holding the lampshade in her hand, the metal cold against her skin. But beside her, the echo, the silent duplicate, was gone. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. "Amelia?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned to me, her eyes no longer reflecting terror, but a weary, haunted understanding. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice barely a sigh. I reached out, my hand trembling, and took hers. "Amelia," I said, my voice full of relief. "You're okay." She squeezed my hand, a faint smile playing on her lips. But those eyes held a darkness, a depth of understanding that wasn't there before. It was a darkness born of a battle fought and won, a darkness that spoke of a glimpse into the depths of the unknown, a darkness that might never truly leave her. "It's not done," she whispered, her voice a mere shadow. "It's just waiting." The words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the terror we had faced, a terror that had taken a piece of us both. As we stood there, the silence of the attic swirling around us, I realized that the double might be gone, but its shadow, its chilling memory, would forever linger in the recesses of our minds. And as we descended the attic stairs, the faint, flickering light from the hallway casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, a nagging fear that the shadow was still out there, waiting, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to return. The moment when the darkness would consume us all. The lingering exhaustion of a long day's work weighed heavily on my weary body as I fumbled with my keys, desperate for the solace of my sanctuary. The familiar creak of the door, a symphony to my ears, echoed through the dimly lit hallway as I stepped inside. Darkness shrouded the room like a suffocating blanket, accentuating the deafening silence. Stumbling towards the living room, I reached out for the light switch, my fingers grazing against its cool surface. But a sudden jolt coursed through my body as another hand, cold and clammy, enveloped mine. A paralyzing terror seized me, threatening to consume my very being. Adrenaline surged through my veins, igniting a primal instinct to flee. I wrenched my hand free, stumbling backward as my heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. Darkness enveloped me, suffocating my senses and amplifying my growing paranoia. My trembling hand fumbled for the wall, desperate for any semblance of stability in this chaos. But as I stumbled forward, my foot caught on something, sending me crashing to the floor. Pain erupted from my knee, but it was the sound that followed that sent shivers down my spine, a faint, guttural chuckle. Frozen in fear, I listened intently, my breath held captive in my chest. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approached from the darkness, each one sending a fresh wave of terror through me. They stopped mere inches from me, and I could feel the presence of something other, its breath warm against my skin. A voice, raspy and filled with an otherworldly malice, whispered into my ear, "You're not alone." Panic consumed me, and I surged to my feet, desperate to escape the clutches of the nightmare that had entrapped me. But the darkness was alive, clinging to me like a malevolent shadow. It whispered and taunted, playing with my sanity like a sadistic puppeteer. Reason fled as fear took hold, transforming me into a quivering, helpless creature. I stumbled through the darkness, my hands flailing wildly, desperate for any lifeline that could save me from this living nightmare. Just when I felt the darkness closing in, consuming my very soul, a faint glimmer of light appeared in the distance. With renewed determination, I surged towards it, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. As I approached the light, I realized it was coming from the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, beckoning me towards a possible haven. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling, and slowly pushed it open. The bathroom was small and cramped, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the darkness I had just endured. Light spilled from the vanity mirror, casting an eerie glow on the room. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something peculiar, a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in shadows. Fear paralyzed me once more as the figure slowly emerged from the darkness, its features twisted into a grotesque mockery of a human face. Its eyes, black and soulless, burned with an infernal fire, and its mouth curled into a sinister grin. The creature took a step towards me, its movements fluid and predatory. I could feel its foul breath against my skin, and the overwhelming stench of decay filled my nostrils. A primal scream tore from my throat, but it was swallowed by the suffocating darkness that enveloped the room. In a moment of desperation, I reached for the sink, grasping a heavy ceramic mug. With all my remaining strength, I hurled it at the creature, praying to inflict any damage that could drive it away. The mug connected with the creature's head, but it let out a mere grunt and continued its inexorable advance. Panic surged through me, and I knew I had to escape. Grabbing a nearby towel, I wrapped it around my hand and smashed the bathroom mirror, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The deafening crash reverberated through the room, momentarily stunning the creature. Using the broken glass as a weapon, I charged at the creature, slashing and stabbing wildly. Blood and shards of glass flew through the air as I fought for my survival. In a desperate gambit, I managed to plunge the broken shard of the mirror into the creature's chest. It let out an ear-splitting shriek and stumbled backward, its form dissolving into the shadows. With the creature gone, the darkness seemed to recede, and the silence was deafening. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. I had survived the nightmare, but the scars of that night would forever haunt my waking hours. As dawn approached, I stumbled out of the bathroom, my mind racing. I knew I had to report what I had witnessed, but who would believe the ravings of a terrified man? In the end, I chose to keep my experience a secret, a chilling tale whispered only to the solitude of my own thoughts. And though I have found a semblance of peace in the years since, the memory of that night lingers, a reminder that even in the sanctity of our own homes, darkness can find us, and it can leave behind a mark that will never fully fade. The house was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of my heart against my ribs. It was a frantic, panicked beat, a drum solo of fear that echoed in my ears. My wife's voice, soft and hushed, vibrated in the darkness. "John, wake up," she whispered, urgency clinging to her words like smoke. "There's someone in the house." It took a moment for my brain to register the sound, to peel away the flimsy veil of sleep and register that it was her voice, my wife's voice, the voice that hadn't graced my ears for 2 years, 2 long agonizing years since that night, the night that stole her from me, the night that turned my world into a cold, lonely graveyard. My world had been a gray, hushed space ever since. "Karen?" I stammered, my voice raspy with disuse, my chest constricting with a fear so primal it felt like it could squeeze the air from my lungs. "Quick, John, call the police," she whispered again, and the fear in her voice snaked through me, cold and sharp. "He's in the kitchen." I sat up in bed, my heart thundering in alarm against my ribs, a primal, frantic call to action. I tried to talk, to say something, but the words caught in my throat, choked by the rising tide of panic. "John, please call the police," she implored, her voice a frantic plea against the quiet of the night. The phone, nestled on the bedside table, felt like a hot coal in my hand. I fumbled for it, my fingers trembling. It was like a dream, a nightmare that refused to let me wake. The familiar shape of the phone, the feel of its smooth plastic beneath my trembling fingers, brought a wave of intense nausea. "Karen, please let me get the phone," I choked out, my voice caught in the grip of terror. "John, hurry!" Her voice, desperate, urgent, echoed in the darkness, and suddenly, a sound, a scraping, metallic sound, cut through the silence. A sound that sent a fresh wave of ice-cold dread through my veins. I stared at the phone, its screen a mocking black rectangle in the dark. Why wasn't I dialing? Why was my hand, my very being, paralyzed with terror? A new sound, a chilling thud, echoed from the kitchen. My wife's voice, a mixture of fear and a sharp, piercing pain, cut through the silence. "John, he's here." The words, the fear, the pain in her voice, the sudden, terrifying silence that followed, ripped through me. It was a waking nightmare, a scene borrowed from the depths of my nightmares, a scene that had haunted me every night for 2 long years, the night she... I couldn't finish the thought. It felt like a betrayal, a sacrilege to even think it. The phone slipped from my hand, thudding onto the bedside table, a metallic crash in the stark silence of the room. I was frozen, paralyzed by the terror that clawed its way up my throat. John! The whisper, barely a thread of sound, drifted from the kitchen. It was a whisper that could only be heard through the thundering beat of my heart, muffled by the fog of horror that clouded my mind. I scrambled out of bed, my legs shaky and weak. I fumbled for the light switch, the darkness suddenly pressing down on me, suffocating me in its cold embrace. When the room flooded with light, I forced myself to look at the bedroom door. It was closed, the white paint of the door reflecting the harsh light from the bedside lamp. And then, the memory, a brutal, unwelcome visitor, slammed into my senses. The memory of the night she was taken. It was a cold night, just like this one. A night when the shadows stretched long across the floorboards, and the air in the living room felt heavy and oppressive. An intruder, masked and cold-eyed, had broken into our house, had crept into the bedroom, had stolen her away, leaving me with the hollow silence of an empty bed and a heart that crumbled into a million pieces. The sound of a thud from the kitchen, the memory of the night 2 years ago, the fear that still clung to the edges of my senses like a phantom limb, it all coalesced into a chilling reality. It was happening again. My body, despite the paralyzing fear that kept me rooted to the spot, felt as if it was moving on autopilot. My hand, like a puppet on strings, reached for the phone again. I fumbled with the buttons, my fingers heavy and clumsy. I felt the coldness of the phone against my skin, a chilling reminder of who I had lost, who I might lose again. The first ring reverberated through the room, a shrill, urgent sound that cut through the silence. Another ring, and then another. I listened to the mechanical voice on the other end, the voice that felt so far away, so unreachably distant in the face of this horrifying reality. 911, what is your emergency? My throat felt as if it were packed with cotton. I tried to speak, but the words refused to come. Hello? The voice on the other end pressed, a hint of urgency creeping into its tone. Finally, the words tumbled from my lips, choked and broken. There's an intruder in my house. I felt the weight of her absence, the hollowness of her bed, as I spoke. The fear that had been a constant companion for 2 years pulsed in my veins, a hot, relentless fire. Where is your location? The voice asked, professional and calm. The words, the sound of her name, her voice, the memory of that night, it was all too much. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the overwhelming dread that threatened to engulf me. Get out of there, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. I heard the pounding of my heart in my ears, the muffled sound of the 911 operator, the quiet, chilling scraping coming from the kitchen. Fear, cold and sharp, gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. I could feel the cold sweat rolling down my back, the trembling of my hands. Listen to me, sir. Stay where you are, the operator's voice, firm and reassuring, cut through the terror that threatened to engulf me. We're on our way. I held my breath, every sound, every rustle, every creak of the old house sending a fresh wave of terror through me. The sounds from the kitchen intensified, a series of thuds, scrapes, and whispers that sent a shiver down my spine. Then, a chilling silence descended. The silence of the empty house, the silence of her absence, the silence of a nightmare that wouldn't end. Can you tell me what happened, sir? The operator's voice asked, her tone laced with concern. I opened my mouth, but the terror choked my words. The fear, the despair, the raw, visceral fear, washed over me in a wave. He was here 2 years ago, I finally managed to whisper, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. He took my wife. A long silence stretched over the phone. The operator's breathing, measured and calm, felt eerily distant. He was here again, I breathed, the words barely audible, consumed by the terrible truth that unfurled in my mind. The nightmare was back, and this time, it wasn't just a memory. It was real. I think he's gone, I added, the words a feeble attempt to hold on to a sliver of hope, a tiny ember of defiance in the face of the overwhelming dread. I listened to the crackle of the phone, the soft sound of the operator's breathing, and the creeping silence of the house that seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the silence was an illusion, a momentary lull before the storm. It wasn't over. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. They were coming, a beacon of hope slicing through the darkness of my fear. A desperate plea for salvation in a reality that felt increasingly surreal. Suddenly, another sound. It was a low, soft whisper, coming from the direction of the kitchen. "John." The whisper, barely audible, was a thread of sound that cut through the silence, a voice from the past, a haunting echo of a nightmare that wouldn't end. "Karen?" I breathed, my voice filled with terror and disbelief. I could barely make out her shape in the darkness, a shimmering, spectral figure in the doorway to the kitchen, her eyes filled with a sorrow that could pierce the soul. "He's gone, John," she whispered, her voice a soft sigh, a ghostly echo of the warmth I had once known. "But I'm sorry. I can't stay." She drifted towards me, a wisp of smoke in the light of the bedside lamp, and then, just as quickly, she was gone. The sirens screamed in the distance, growing closer, their sound a beacon of hope against the darkness of my terror. I felt the cold sweat on my skin, the trembling of my hands, the weight of the fear that threatened to consume me. But the house, the silence, the emptiness, all held a new, unwelcome truth. The intruder was gone. But she wasn't coming back. He had stolen her from me twice, and all that remained was the chilling silence of a heart left to beat alone in the darkness. I was no longer just a man grieving for his lost wife. I was a man living a nightmare, haunted by the ghosts of a love lost and a fear that refused to die. And in the silence of the house, I was left alone, to face the darkness, to face the specter of a nightmare that would never really end. The sirens howled at the door, their sound a chorus of hope, but in the cold, unforgiving silence of the house, I knew the truth. The nightmare had just begun. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just my imagination. I was curled up on the couch, the familiar weight of Luna, my black cat, settling on my lap. She was a creature of routine, predictable in her habits, and I knew her every twitch. As I idly scrolled through my phone, I felt her gaze on me. Luna was a master of the steely stare. Her emerald eyes, always seeming to gleam with an uncanny intelligence, held me captive. It was a look that made me feel both adored and scrutinized. But that particular night, something felt different. Her gaze seemed intense. It was as if she wasn't looking at me at all, but through me. I raised my head, meeting her eyes, and her gaze didn't falter. She continued to stare, her head tilted at an unsettling angle, emerald orbs fixated on a point just beyond my shoulder. I felt a prickle of unease, a shiver down my spine. I glanced behind me. Nothing. Just the empty space where the living room wall met the ceiling. The feeling lingered unsettling, like the echo of a forgotten fear. "Just your imagination," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the feeling. Luna, as if sensing my unease, stretched and kneaded her paws on my lap, a rumbling purr emanating from her chest. The feeling subsided, leaving only a faint tremor in my gut. It wasn't a one-time occurrence. It happened again, the next day, and the day after that. Each time, Luna's gaze followed me, unwavering, always fixated on that same spot behind me, her emerald eyes burning with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. It became a ritual, a constant presence in my life, a silent, feline obsession. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps she was staring at a dust mote, a fly, something I couldn't see. Maybe she was just fascinated by the light reflecting off the wall. But the feeling of being watched, of being scrutinized by a creature with an intelligence that seemed too sharp to be natural, it gnawed at me. Then, one night, the feeling intensified. It was a Friday, and I was alone in the apartment, the silence broken only by the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window. I was hunched over my laptop, working late, the glow of the screen reflecting in my tired eyes. Luna, as usual, was perched on the back of the couch, her gaze fixed on that same spot behind me. But tonight, the intensity of her stare was different, filled with a predatory hunger I hadn't noticed before. My neck felt stiff, my muscles tense as if trying to fend off an unseen predator. I couldn't tear my gaze away from her. She seemed to be waiting, anticipating something. The air in the room became thick, heavy, the silence now a tangible pressure on my chest. I felt a prickle of fear, a cold dread that snaked up my spine. Then, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs. I saw nothing, just the shadows of the furniture, the familiar contours of my living room, the comforting normalcy of my home. But the feeling persisted, a lingering dread, a sense that something was wrong, that something was watching me. Luna, however, seemed strangely relaxed. Her eyes, still focused on that same point behind me, seemed to hold a glint of satisfaction. The next day, I decided I needed help. I called a friend, a veterinarian, a woman with a calming voice and a reassuring smile. She listened patiently to my concerns, my fears, my growing obsession with Luna's bizarre behavior. "It's probably just a quirk," she said, her voice soothing, her words a balm to my growing paranoia. "Cats are naturally curious creatures. She might be fascinated by a shadow or a reflection, or maybe she just likes the way you look when you're hunched over your laptop." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I began keeping a journal, jotting down every instance of Luna's staring, every time she seemed to be fixated on something beyond my comprehension. The details were a growing tapestry of unease, each entry deepening the pit of anxiety in my stomach. One night, as I lay in bed, trying to ignore the insistent prickling sensation on the back of my neck, Luna leaped onto the bed, her usual grace replaced by a jarring agility. Her emerald eyes, normally glowing with a playful curiosity, now burned with an unsettling intensity. She perched on the edge of the bed, her gaze fixed on the spot behind me, a silent predator watching its prey. And then I saw it. A faint shimmer in the air, a subtle distortion in the reality of my bedroom. A shape was forming in the space behind me, a blur of darkness taking the form of a figure, tall and impossibly thin, its features obscured by the shadows that clung to it like a shroud. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, my breath catching in my throat. My gaze was locked on the apparition, my mind racing to find a logical explanation for the impossible. Luna, her gaze unwavering, seemed to be observing the scene with an almost predatory delight. She let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to resonate in the darkness, filling the room with a primal fear. The apparition began to take shape, its features slowly materializing from the shadows. It was a human-like figure, but with elongated limbs, skeletal, its skin a sickly shade of gray, its eyes two glowing orbs of pure white. The creature seemed to be reaching for me, its insubstantial hand brushing against the back of my neck, a touch that sent chills crawling down my spine. Panic flooded my senses. I scrambled out of bed, my eyes searching for something, anything to defend myself, my mind screaming for a logical explanation, a desperate attempt to deny the impossible. Luna, however, remained still, her gaze fixed on the figure, her emerald eyes reflecting the fear in my heart. The creature hissed, a sound that seemed to scrape against the very fabric of reality, its voice a cold whisper in my ear. The apparition, seeming to solidify, reached for me, its touch sending shivers of dread through my body. Terror, raw and primal, took over. I stumbled back, my feet tangling in the sheets, my scream dying in my throat. The creature's hand grazed the back of my neck, and the world went dark. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed, the sterile white walls a stark contrast to the nightmare I had just experienced. The smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils, and the faint hum of machinery filled the air. I was weak, my body still numb from the shock, the memory of the creature's touch lingering like a bad taste in my mouth. I looked around the room, searching for Luna, but she was nowhere to be seen. A nurse, her face drawn with concern, approached my bed, her voice a soothing melody to my aching head. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice laced with a hint of awe. "You were found unconscious in your apartment, a cat on top of you." My fear, initially replaced by the relief of waking up in a hospital, returned with a vengeance. The creature, the touch on my neck, the fear in Luna's eyes, everything was a terrifying reality. "Where's Luna?" I asked, my voice a rasping whisper. She's been taken to the animal shelter, the nurse said, her voice filled with a strange sadness. She was acting strange. It was difficult to handle her. She left, her footsteps receding down the hallway, leaving me alone with my fear, my mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. I had seen the creature, felt its touch. It was real. And it had been watching me. But why? And where had Luna gone? A new fear, cold and gnawing, settled in the pit of my stomach. The creature was gone, but it had left a mark, a chilling reminder of its existence. And Luna, my cat, the creature that had been watching me, was gone. Had she been taken, or had she been the one who had brought the creature to me? The questions haunted me, each unanswered question deepening the growing pit of terror in my heart. I was no longer just a man living a normal life. I was a man who had seen the unseen, felt the touch of the unfathomable. And I was haunted by the question, what was going to happen next? As I sat in the hospital bed, my gaze drawn to the window, I saw it. A cat, a black blur against the darkening sky, sitting on the fire escape across the street. Its emerald eyes, gleaming in the twilight, stared directly at me. And then, it was gone. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew, with a certainty that defied reason, that Luna was watching me. And she was not alone. The ceiling had become the canvas for a macabre masterpiece. Crimson streaks, thick and dripping, formed a single, chilling word, yes. It hung above me, a stark, undeniable answer. An answer I never asked for, an answer I wasn't sure I even wanted. Yesterday, curiosity had gotten the better of me. It was a stupid, childish impulse, a fleeting desire to feel a connection to the unknown. My friend, Amelia, had insisted it was harmless, just a game. We'd gathered in her dimly lit apartment, the only light coming from a single candle flickering on the coffee table. The Ouija board lay between us, its wooden surface worn smooth with countless whispers and unanswered questions. Just one question, Amelia had said, her voice a whisper against the silence. Just a simple one. I had agreed, my heart pounding in my chest. I had chosen the question carefully, something innocuous, something I thought would reveal a comforting truth. It was a question that had plagued me for years, a lingering doubt I hadn't been able to shake. Is he still alive? The planchette had moved with a jerky, almost violent energy, its response a resounding yes. But then, it had stopped. I felt a cold surge of panic, an unsettling feeling that something wasn't right, that we had crossed a line. We had packed the board away, the answer still hanging in the air, a weight pressing down on my chest. Later that night, as I climbed into bed, I had dismissed the feeling. It was just my imagination playing tricks on me, I told myself. But then I'd heard it, a soft scrabbling sound, like claws against the walls of my apartment. It had stopped as abruptly as it began. I'd convinced myself it was just the ventilation system, a creaking pipe, anything but the chilling possibility that someone, something, was watching me. Now, the chilling answer stood before me, painted in a language I didn't understand. It wasn't just the blood that sent shivers down my spine, but the sheer audacity of the response, the absolute certainty that radiated from the single word, the blatant disregard for the barriers I had so carefully created. Suddenly, I was aware of every sound, every creak and groan of my apartment building. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. I needed to get out, needed to find someone, anyone, who could help me understand this. Amelia, of course, was the first person who came to mind. But I was paralyzed with fear, unable to pick up the phone, to make contact with the outside world. The blood on the ceiling seemed to pulsate with a primal fear, a warning against seeking help, against breaking the silence. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my laptop, the screen reflecting the blood-red word above me. I typed Ouija board answers in blood into the search bar, desperately hoping for an explanation, an answer that made sense, that could soothe the growing dread that was threatening to consume me. The search results were a mix of horror stories and paranormal forum threads, each more disturbing than the last. Some linked it to malevolent spirits, others to entities that revel in fear and chaos. There was no clear answer, no helpful advice. It felt as if I was plunging deeper into a rabbit hole, the walls closing in, suffocating me with every scroll. Finally, I stumbled upon a post on a forum dedicated to the occult. It was an account from someone who claimed to have experienced something similar, a story that resonated with the cold fear that had gripped me. The board is a gateway, the post read, a bridge between worlds. The answers are not always what we expect, not always what we want. The author described a similar experience, a chilling answer appearing on their ceiling, the blood and unwelcome testament to a connection they had inadvertently made. The more I read, the more certain I became that this was not just a random, isolated incident. The post suggested that the answer in blood was a sign, an attempt to establish a connection, an unwelcome invitation to a world I didn't want to be in. But what did it mean? What was this connection, this unwelcome invitation? I needed to understand, to control this new reality I had unwittingly stumbled into. I reached back to the post, rereading it, searching for clues, for any information that could help me. And there it was, a single line buried within the dense text: the connection can be severed, but it comes at a price. A price. A price to be paid for a mistake I hadn't even realized I had made. What could that price be? Was it my sanity? My life? The fear was paralyzing. But something else started to stir within me, a primal instinct for survival, a desperate need to regain control. I couldn't let this consume me, couldn't give in to the fear. I needed to find a way to break this connection, to undo the mistake I had made. I searched online, scouring every forum, every blog, every website dedicated to the occult. I devoured every piece of information I could find, desperately hoping for a solution, a way out of this terrifying predicament. There was a wealth of information on various rituals and spells, each promising a way to break the connection to the unknown. But the rituals seemed convoluted, dangerous, and I wasn't sure I could handle it. They required specific ingredients, specific chants, specific actions under specific conditions. I wanted something simpler, something more direct, something I could do without risking my life. And then I found it. A single line in a book on demonology, a phrase tucked away in a chapter on binding and exorcism. It was a simple statement, a single phrase that resonated with an unsettling familiarity. The bridge can be broken by the denial of the answer. Deny the answer. That was it. It was incredibly simple, almost absurdly easy. Yes. The blood on the ceiling seemed to stare at me, mocking my understanding, challenging my courage. It was a test, a final challenge before my escape. No, I whispered, my voice a tremor against the suffocating silence. No, it's not true. It's not real. I didn't know if it was working, if the denial was enough, but I had to believe it. I repeated the denial, louder this time, my voice gaining strength with each repetition. No. It's not true. It's not real. The blood remained on the ceiling, a dark stain against the white surface. It didn't disappear, didn't fade, but it didn't pulsate, didn't seem to mock me with the certainty of its answer. It was simply there, a reminder of what I had done, a warning of what I could become. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened anxiety. I expected the blood to change, to morph into something more menacing, to reveal some new, terrifying secret. But it remained the same, a chilling reminder of my transgression, a constant shadow that clung to me, a reminder of the power I had inadvertently unleashed. I was never able to erase the fear, the feeling that something was still out there, watching. It never went away entirely, but it dulled, faded, becoming a distant echo in the back of my mind. The experience changed me. It stripped me bare, exposed my deepest fears, and forced me to confront the reality of the unknown. It was a dark, terrifying journey, a descent into a world I never wanted to visit. But it was also a lesson, a harsh, unforgiving education in the power of fear, the power of the unknown. I never looked at an Ouija board the same way again. It was no longer just a game, a curiosity, a fleeting diversion. It was a portal, a gateway to a world I wasn't sure I could handle, a world where the lines between reality and fantasy were blurred, where the answers whispered in the shadows, where the price of knowledge could be a bloody stain on the ceiling. The blood remains on the ceiling, a constant reminder of the night I pushed open the door to the unknown and found a world that was not ready for me, a world that I was not ready for. It is a permanent scar on my reality, a testament to the power of the unknown, a chilling reminder that some questions are better left unanswered. In the depths of the quiet suburban night, our tale unfolds in the quaint abode I called home. It was a cozy haven, a refuge from the bustling life outside my door. But as the days turned into weeks, an insidious noise began to permeate my living space, seeping into the fabric of my peace. The upstairs apartment, once empty and silent, had become a source of incessant disturbance. Footsteps thundered overhead, furniture scraped across the floor, and muffled voices echoed through the ceiling like an unwelcome chorus. It was as if an invisible family had taken up residence above me, engaged in a perpetual and raucous revelry. Sleep eluded me, replaced by a persistent symphony of nocturnal disturbances. I tossed and turned in my bed, my mind racing with frustration and the futile search for respite. Each creak and groan from the floor above became a torment, exacerbating my growing desperation. Determined to find a solution, I approached my landlord, a portly and affable man who resided in a house a few blocks away. With a mixture of exasperation and embarrassment, I recounted my sleepless nights and the inexplicable noises emanating from my supposedly vacant upstairs unit. To my astonishment, the landlord's eyes widened in surprise. "Vacant?" he exclaimed. "That apartment has been unoccupied for months. I've had the utilities turned off and the keys in my possession." A chill ran down my spine as I realized the sinister implication of his words. If the upstairs apartment was indeed empty, then who or what was responsible for the relentless disturbances that plagued my nights? As days turned into sleepless nights, a sense of unease settled over me. The relentless noise became a constant companion, driving me to the brink of madness. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, and the darkness seemed to close in on me like a suffocating blanket. Desperate for answers, I began to conduct my own investigation. I crept up the stairs late at night, my heart pounding in my chest, and pressed my ear against the door of the vacant apartment. To my horror, I heard faint sounds coming from within, muffled laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft whisper of voices. Fear propelled me backward down the stairs, my legs trembling beneath me. I had stumbled upon a horrifying truth: my upstairs neighbors were not human. They were something else entirely, unseen and malevolent entities that had taken up residence in the empty space above me. Night after night the noises persisted, growing louder and more menacing. The laughter morphed into eerie cackles, the clinking of glasses became the shattering of bones, and the whispers transformed into guttural growls. I barricaded myself in my room, trembling under the weight of an unseen terror. My landlord, once dismissive of my concerns, was now equally terrified. He came to my apartment, armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, but even his presence did little to quell the fear that gnawed at us both. We listened in horrified silence as the noises above escalated, reaching a crescendo of unholy cacophony. Just when I thought I couldn't endure another moment of this living nightmare, the disturbances abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the noise had been. For a brief moment, I dared to hope that the entities had finally left me in peace. But my respite was short-lived. The following night, the noises returned with a vengeance, more sinister and terrifying than ever before. I knew then that there was no escape, that I was trapped in a waking nightmare that would never end. As the days turned into an endless cycle of torment, I retreated further into myself. I became a prisoner in my own home, haunted by unseen horrors and the relentless fear that consumed me. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I began to question my own sanity. One fateful night, as the noises reached their peak, I snapped. Driven by desperation and a primal instinct for survival, I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a heavy wooden table, and charged upstairs. I burst into the empty apartment, my heart pounding like a drum, and began to smash everything in sight. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and torn curtains flew through the air as I unleashed my pent-up rage and terror. I screamed and wept, my voice echoing through the desolate rooms. In a moment of clarity, I realized the futility of my actions. The entities were not there. They were not bound by the physical realm and could not be harmed by my feeble attempts at resistance. With newfound despair, I collapsed on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my futile destruction. The noises continued unabated, their malevolence mocking my shattered existence. As the night wore on, I lay there, defeated and broken. The entities had won. They had claimed my home, my peace of mind, and my very soul. In the end, I was nothing more than a pawn in their cruel and inexplicable game. Haunted by the horrors I had endured, I fled my home and never looked back. I wandered aimlessly for weeks, seeking refuge from the unseen horrors that pursued me. But even in my exile, I could not escape the torment that had become a part of me. The fear, the paranoia, and the ceaseless noise followed me everywhere I went, a constant reminder of the nightmare I had endured. And so, I became the eternal wanderer, forever haunted by the unseen horrors that dwelled in the darkness of my past.